Have you ever wondered why good people suffer? This is one of humanity's oldest questions, and the Bible gives us a profound answer through the story of Job. Job lived in the land of Uz and was known for his integrity, righteousness, and fear of God. He was extremely wealthy, owning 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and many servants. In the eyes of the world, he was the greatest man of the East. But his greatest treasure was not his material possessions, it was his faith and devotion to the Lord. Along with his prosperity, Job had a large and united family, with 7 sons and 3 daughters. He not only enjoyed his blessings, but also interceded daily for his household, showing a heart devoted to God. However, Satan challenged his faithfulness, claiming that Job only served God because of his wealth. Then the Lord allowed him to be tested. In a short time, he lost everything: his children, his possessions, and his health. Yet in the midst of such pain, Job remained steadfast in his faith. In this study, you will discover 25 powerful lessons from the book of Job, each one based on biblical verses and applicable to our daily lives. First lesson: faithfulness in pain. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Job 1:1. Job was known for his integrity and reverence for the Lord. He turned away from evil and lived an exemplary life, yet he still faced deep sorrow and irreparable loss. This teaches us that faithfulness to God is not a guarantee of a life without trials. On the contrary, obedience often becomes the very reason we are tested. Job remained steadfast when everything around him collapsed, proving that his trust was in God and not in fleeting circumstances. This lesson challenges us to stand firm even when life makes no sense, remembering that God sees us, knows our hearts, and sustains us in the midst of the storm. To be faithful is always worth it, even when everything seems against us. Second lesson: everything belongs to God. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job 1:21. After losing all of his children and possessions, Job made one of the most powerful statements in the Bible. He acknowledged that everything we have is temporary and ultimately belongs to God. This verse reveals a heart detached from material things and deeply rooted in true worship. Job did not blame God but praised his name. Here we learn that spiritual maturity is being able to worship even in loss, and that gratitude does not depend on circumstances. Everything comes from God, and if He allows something to be taken away, it is because there is a greater purpose we cannot yet see. Third lesson: God does not change. In all this, Job sinned not nor charged God foolishly. Job 1:22. Even after losing everything he had, Job did not rise up against God or allow words of rebellion to come from his mouth. He understood that God's character is unchanging and does not depend on circumstances. This attitude reveals true spiritual maturity. It is easy to worship when life goes well, but genuine faith is tested in the midst of chaos. Often, we are tempted to doubt God's goodness when facing pain. Job teaches us that God remains just, good, and holy, even when we cannot understand His ways. Suffering does not change who God is, but it can reveal who we truly are before Him. Fourth lesson: nothing escapes God's control. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. Job 1:12. Before Satan could touch Job, God set a boundary. This reminds us that even in the hardest trials, the enemy does not act with unlimited freedom. The Lord remains sovereign, allowing only what can serve a greater purpose. This truth gives us security. Nothing happens outside of His knowledge. This lesson calls us to trust God, even when we are attacked or treated unjustly, for He is attentive and places a hedge around those who love Him. Job's suffering was not a sign of abandonment, but part of a deeper and sovereign plan. Fifth lesson: worship in the midst of loss. Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. Job 1:20. Job's reaction to tragedy is astonishing. After losing his children, possessions, and health, he did not rebel, but chose to worship. His pain was real, yet his reverence was even greater. This act reveals that true worship does not depend on circumstances, but on a decision of faith. To worship in the midst of loss is to acknowledge that God remains worthy even when everything around us collapses. Job did not deny his grief, but he brought his suffering before the Lord. We learn that in pain, faith matures, and worship becomes deeper and more genuine. Sixth lesson: when silence brings comfort. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Job 2:13. Job's friends, faced with his immense suffering, found no words, so they simply sat with him in silence for 7 days. This gesture shows that true comfort is often not found in speeches, but in the quiet presence of those who care. At times, we try to explain pain or offer quick answers, but there are sorrows no words can heal. In such moments, empathy speaks louder than explanations. Silence, when filled with love and compassion, becomes a presence that comforts the soul. We learn here that being present can be the greatest act of friendship and care. Seventh lesson: standing firm under intimate pressure. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." Job 2:9. At the height of his pain, even Job's wife, overwhelmed by despair, urged him to abandon his faith. This moment reveals that sometimes even those closest to us can discourage us spiritually when they themselves are hurting. Yet Job remained steadfast, proving that his faithfulness did not depend on the opinions of others, but on his trust in the Lord. The lesson is clear. True faith must be rooted in God, not in human approval. When pressure comes even from those dearest to us, choosing to honor God is the greatest expression of love and perseverance. Eighth lesson: not all suffering is punishment. Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? Job 2:10. In answering his wife, Job reveals a faith that is not limited to good days. He acknowledges that God remains Lord both in times of joy and in seasons of affliction. This statement reflects spiritual maturity. Not every tragedy is the result of punishment. Sometimes suffering is an instrument of growth and revelation. Often, God allows pain to shape us and strengthen our trust in Him. This lesson reminds us that genuine faith does not crumble in the face of loss, but endures, holding fast to God's love and sovereignty, even when His purposes remain beyond our understanding. Ninth lesson: the misunderstanding of friends. I have become a laughingstock to my friends. Job 12:4. In the midst of his pain, Job also faced the scorn of those who should have comforted him. His friends did not understand his struggle and falsely accused him of guilt. This shows us that we cannot always expect understanding even from those closest to us. Many times we may be judged unfairly, even when we are walking in integrity. This lesson reminds us not to let human misunderstanding shake our faith. We must root our identity in God, for he knows the truth of our hearts. People may fail and misjudge us, but the Lord never makes a mistake about who we are. 10th lesson. God hears our lament. Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Job 3:11. In this cry of despair, Job opens his heart and reveals the weight of his suffering. His pain was so deep that he wished he had never been born. This moment teaches us that God does not ask for eloquent speeches, but for honesty before him. True faith does not deny anguish, but brings it to the Lord in prayer. Job showed that even lament can be offered to God, and he does not reject those who cry out sincerely. This lesson reminds us that the Lord welcomes our tears and values the truth of the heart over proud silence. 11th lesson. God prefers sincerity. I despise my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone. My days have no meaning. Job 7:16. Job did not mask his pain or try to sound religious to appear strong. He opened his heart before God, confessing his weary soul and his desire to give up. This attitude shows that the Lord does not seek spiritual appearances, but authenticity. Even in his brokenness, Job kept speaking to God, and that itself is an act of faith. The lesson is powerful. We can be completely honest before the Father. He knows our frailty, understands our limitations, and welcomes even our hardest words when they come from a broken heart that still acknowledges his presence in the midst of pain. 12th lesson. Counsel without compassion hurts. Your maxims are proverbs of ashes. Your defenses are defenses of clay. Job 13:12. Job did not remain silent in the face of his friends' words. He confronted them because their counsel, instead of bringing comfort, only deepened his pain. They tried to explain suffering with religious speeches and ready-made answers, but without genuine compassion. This scene teaches us that offering support is not about repeating pretty phrases or appearing wise, but about showing empathy. Words spoken without love can become even heavier burdens for those who suffer. True wisdom does not accuse or judge, but embraces and extends a hand. God values truth seasoned with mercy, never cold and heartless speeches. 13th lesson. Even in silence, God is present. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come to his seat. Job 23:3. Job's heart longed for answers. He yearned for an encounter with God, but seemed to hear nothing but silence. This experience teaches us that at times heaven feels distant and answers do not come. Yet this does not mean that God is absent. The silence of God can be part of his mystery and his work. Job's desire to remain in the divine presence, even without answers, is an example of spiritual perseverance. We learn that trusting God when we neither see nor hear is the purest proof of love. He always listens, even if he chooses not to respond immediately. 14th lesson. God knows our path, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. Job 23:10. Even without understanding the reason for his pain, Job confidently declared that God knew every detail of his path. This statement is one of the most beautiful expressions of faith in the midst of suffering. Job believed that his trial would not be in vain, but that his life would be refined like gold in the fire. The lesson is clear. The Lord never loses control and even uses struggles to shape us. No tear is wasted before him. Trusting this truth gives us hope and strength to walk through life's deserts, believing that God is perfecting us. 15th lesson. Our righteousness is limited. Even if I were innocent, my mouth would condemn me. Job 9:20. Job recognized that even if he tried to justify himself, he could never stand fully righteous before God. This verse teaches us about spiritual humility. No matter how right we may think we are, before the holiness of God, we all fall short and are in need of grace. The lesson is clear. Trusting in our own righteousness is foolish. Job understood that it is not human merit that keeps us standing, but divine mercy. This realization is freeing, for it leads us to depend on God's forgiveness and grace. True wisdom begins when we lay down pride and surrender to His truth. 16th lesson. True wisdom is humility. God is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who has hardened himself against him and prospered? Job 9:4. Job acknowledged God's incomparable greatness, His infinite wisdom, and sovereign power. He understood that resisting the Creator is futile, for no one finds peace while fighting against His will. This truth reminds us that real wisdom is not measured by knowledge alone, but is born from reverence and humility before God. Pride distances us from peace, but submission draws us closer to it. The lesson is clear. Accepting the Lord's sovereignty, even when we do not understand, is the path to living in trust. Only then can we experience the peace that flows from genuine faith in Him. 17th lesson, God cares about every detail. Remember that you molded me like clay. Will you now turn me to dust again? Job 10:9. In this plea, Job appeals to God's tenderness, reminding him that he was created by His hands. He acknowledges his fragility, being formed from the dust of the earth, and wonders if God would destroy what He so carefully shaped. The lesson here is that God is never indifferent to our pain. We are the work of His love, created with purpose. Job expressed his vulnerability, teaching us that we too can bring our frailty before the Lord. God knows every detail of our being from the womb. He does not forget us in suffering. On the contrary, He is present even when we feel most broken. 18th lesson, there is hope in the midst of pain. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and He shall stand at last on the earth. Job 19:25. Even surrounded by tragedy and God's silence, Job makes one of the most powerful declarations in Scripture. He believes that his Redeemer is alive and that in the end He will rise. This confession goes beyond present suffering and points to future hope. Job, even in pain, looked ahead to the promise of resurrection and divine justice. The lesson is clear. No matter how dark the valley, faith in the Redeemer keeps hope alive. Knowing that God has the final word changes how we endure pain. He is faithful, and in the end, His love and justice will prevail over all things. 19th lesson, integrity matters more than explanations. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. Job 27:5. Even when falsely accused, Job refused to let go of his integrity. He did not understand the reasons for his suffering, yet he chose to remain faithful in character. This decision stands as one of the greatest expressions of faith and spiritual strength. True integrity is not shaped by circumstances, but by a steady choice to honor God. Job teaches us that we do not need all the answers to remain upright before the Lord. The value of integrity surpasses human reasoning and becomes a powerful testimony that living for God is always the best path. 20th lesson. The fear of the Lord is wisdom. And unto man he said, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Job 28:28. In the midst of many questions and debates, Job declares that true wisdom is not found in human intellect, but in reverence for the Lord. To fear God means to recognize his sovereignty and to choose to live according to his will. This fear is not terror, but deep respect that leads us to turn away from evil. The lesson is clear. Knowledge without obedience does not produce life. Humility before God leads to true understanding. Wisdom begins when we bow our hearts before him, walking in paths that reflect his holiness and draw us closer to his presence. 21st lesson, hope beyond frustration. When I looked for good, then evil came unto me, and when I waited for light, there came darkness. Job 30:26. Job opens his heart and admits his frustration at expecting better days, only to receive more pain instead. This experience shows that even the righteous can feel disappointed and perceive life as unfair. Yet Job does not abandon his faith, even when surrounded by darkness. He continues to seek God, proving that true hope is not rooted in circumstances, but in the Lord himself. This lesson reminds us that faith remains a strong thread connecting us to God's purpose, even when everything else seems to fail. The Lord continues to be our light, even in the midst of darkness. 22nd lesson, God always answers. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Job 38:1. After so much silence, God finally speaks to Job in a powerful and direct way. The time of the answer had come. This lesson teaches us that God hears our prayers, even when he seems silent. He responds at the right time, in the right way. His words did not give Job all the explanations he wanted, but revealed something even greater, the majesty of God. When the Lord speaks, everything changes. We don't need to understand everything. We just need to trust that he is faithful and will guide us at the right moment. God answers, and when he speaks, his voice heals, restores, and transforms. 23rd lesson, we don't need to understand to trust. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Job 38:4. God directs a question to Job that highlights the distance between the Creator and the creature. He reminds him that there are mysteries far beyond human comprehension. This was not meant to humiliate Job, but to teach him that faith does not depend on having all the answers. So often we seek immediate explanations, yet what God offers is trust in his sovereignty. The lesson is clear. Even without understanding, we can rest in the Lord who knows and controls all things. Trusting without full comprehension is the essence of faith, and in it we find peace amid life's mysteries. 24th lesson, God takes care of everything. Who provideth for the raven his food, when his young ones cry unto God? Job 38:41. As he speaks to Job, God reminds him that even the fragile, dependent young ravens are fed through his providence. This image reveals the Lord's care, even in the smallest details of creation. If he provides for the needs of the birds, how much more will he care for those made in his image? The lesson is clear. Nothing escapes the attentive eye of the Lord. Even when we do not perceive it, he is supplying what we need. This truth invites us to rest in his provision, trusting that his love is constant, faithful, and sufficient for every circumstance in life. 25th lesson, truly knowing God. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Job 42:5. After everything he endured, Job reached a deeper level of relationship with God. Before, he only knew about him from what he had heard, but now he experienced him personally. This lesson shows that suffering, when faced with faith, can lead us to a more intimate revelation of who God is. Pain does not push us away from the Lord. It draws us closer. Job did not simply learn about God, he came to truly know him. Many times we only see God's face clearly when our tears wash our eyes and brokenness opens the way for his presence. The story of Job is a powerful testimony of faith that endures the greatest trials. Job was upright, feared God, and turned away from evil. Yet he lost everything: his possessions, his children, his health, and his peace. He was falsely accused, despised by those who should have supported him, and faced the silence of heaven. Still, even without answers, he did not abandon his faith. Job questioned, wept, and lamented, but he remained firm in his trust in the Lord. His story teaches us that suffering is not the absence of God, but part of a process of spiritual maturity. True faith does not depend on circumstances, but on a deep relationship with the Creator. In the end, God abundantly restored Job's life. He received twice as much as he had before: 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He was also blessed with 10 more children, including 3 daughters renowned for their beauty. Job lived more than 140 years, saw 4 generations of his descendants, and died old and full of days. His life proves that God honors those who remain faithful, even in the valley of affliction. As we reflect on Job's journey, may we be encouraged to trust even when we do not understand, and believe that with God, the end is always better than the beginning. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried he shall receive the crown of life. James 1:12.